Okay, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to begin our unit over verbs. I'm probably going to split this in half. You'll have maybe two assessments over this, a lot like we did about over pronouns. So just know that you will probably have two tests over verbs as we go through, but we'll worry about that when we get to it. So today we're going to be doing basic definitions of specific phrases that we need to know before we begin talking about certain aspects of verbs, and we're also going to go into like the basic parts of what a verb is or can be or can change to be. So just in general, verbs are what represent the action in a sentence or the being in a sentence. So a lot of times we think of verbs as action words, and that's true. They can definitely be action words, but they're not action words all the time. Sometimes they can show being or be descriptive. So that is the other aspect of verbs. In terms of types of verbs, there's really only two types. You have action verbs, you have those verbs that show action, and you have linking verbs, which are the verbs that show description. So in the sentence below, you have two verbs. You have a complex sentence, which means we have two subject and verb pairs. What I'd like you to do is find the action verb and the linking verb. So in this particular instance, jumped would be our action verb because it's an action that the man is doing. The man is jumping. And smelled would be the linking verb. Now, smelled can be both an action or a linking verb. It just depends on how it's being used. In this particular instance, he, which is the subject of this clause, is not smelling anything. It's being used to describe the way he smelled, which is very bad. So because it's being used to describe as opposed to show action, it's a linking verb. And it's describing it, helping to describe it, linking something from the subject to the predicate, in this particular instance, he, too bad. That's what linking verbs do. It's providing us with a bit of a description about the person. So that's pretty much it. There are action verbs and there are linking verbs. And there are, they do different things. So verbs are not just action words. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but Mr. Holly, what about helping verbs? Aren't those a type of verbs? Well, the short answer to that is yes and no. So verbs have the ability to work in phrases. And what a phrase is a group of words that represents one part of speech. So whenever we have a phrase, we have a group of words working together to represent one part of speech. So yes, while helping verbs are different than main verbs, when we put them together, they still represent either an action verb or a linking verb. So, for instance, if you look in your book on page 350, you're going to find a list of the helping verbs. What I'd like you to do is, and I'll check this tomorrow, I'd like you to write down all of those helping verbs. And using them, I want you to tell me what the helping verb and main verb of each verb phrase in this sentence down here are. So here's the sentence down here. The man should jump into the pool because he will smell bad. So kind of the same sentence, but a little bit different. What I want you to do is, after writing down your notes, label the verb phrases and tell me which one's the helping verb and which one's the main verb. So, looking at these, the whole verb phrase is should jump. Its helping verb is should, its main verb is jump, and the whole thing is acting as one verb, which is should jump, which is an action verb. So much like that, over here, we have the helping verb will, the main verb smell. The whole thing is acting as a linking verb. Because this is the most important thing we need to think about verb phrases. They act as one verb. So if I ask you what the verb of this sentence is, or the verbs of this sentence are, you should say, should jump and will smell. Those are the verbs. We have two words working together to make one part of speech. So I'm not asking you what words make up the verb. I'm asking you what is the verb. And if I ask you what is the verb, you need to say the entire verb phrase. And that's going to be something that I will harp on you for your time until you graduate here. When I ask for the verb, I'm asking for the entirety of the verb phrase. And we should know that verb phrases can be more than two verbs sometimes. I can say, he should have been there to clean the pool. Should have been is my verb phrase. The whole thing. It's a linking verb. No. He should have been there to clean the pool. But regardless, the whole thing is a verb phrase. So if I ask you what the verb of this sentence is, should have been, which is a linking verb, is the verb phrase. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about are the verb forms. So there's basically three forms that verbs can take, depending on how we want to use them in the sentence. Actually, there are four forms, but I'm only going to talk about three for our purposes now. So there's the base of the verb, and that's just the verb by itself. So for this instance, I used walk. So the base of the form of the verb to walk is walk. Then you have the past form of the verb. So for regular verbs, we would add ed or d to the end of the verb to make it past tense. So for this instance, we would say walked. We would add ed to the end of it. And then we have the past participle form of the verb, which means that it has, have, or had in front of it. And for a regular verb, we would once again use that ed of the past form of it. So regular verbs basically mean they are verbs that what they do is they follow a pattern to make past and past participle. So that's it. And the pattern that we use to make verbs past or past participle, or at least regular verbs, is by adding a d or an ed. A d if it ends in e. So that's pretty simple. You guys should know that. That's something that you've been, taught in the past. It's when verbs become irregular that we kind of run into some issues. So if regular verbs are those verbs that follow a pattern to become past or past participle by adding e or ed, it is irregular verbs that do not follow that pattern. So to make a verb, for a verb to become irregular, the only definition that I can really give it is that it does not follow that pattern. When you turn them into the past, they do not follow that pattern of adding an e or ed to become past. And there's just numerous examples of this. For example, in its base form we have is, in its past form we have was, and in its past participle we have, has, or had been. So this is an instance of one that changes its spelling between the base, the past, and the past participle. We have ones that do that as well. We have grow, grew, and have, has, or had grown. We have sing, we have sang, we have, has, or had sung. And to put this in the sentence, this is what this would sound like. I sing every day. I sang yesterday. And I had sung or have sung every day this week. So these are three instances in which I would use the different form of the verb depending on the sentence. Now here's the deal. If it has, have, or had in the sentence anywhere, then the sentence is going to be in the past participle. So that's where this gets a little bit tricky is when I ask you to pick the correct form of a verb for a sentence, you are going to have to identify whether or not it's in the past or it's in the past participle. especially for a lot of these irregular verbs. Now, if you want a list of these irregular verbs, there's a big old list on page, 356 and 357 of your book. Now, I don't want you to write down all of these. I think that would be a bit laborious. But what I would like you to do is I'd like you to go through them and maybe write down the ones that surprise you, the ones that change between the past and the past participle, because those are the ones that are going to be the trickiest for you, especially like on a test or a homework assignment. So, I mean, there's a couple that change, but then there's a couple that don't change. Like, for instance, if I said the base of the verb is set, as in I set the table, if I put it in the past, it would be set. And if I put it in the past participle, it would be have, has, or had set. So this is an example of a verb that doesn't change its spelling at all. It's the same spelling for the base, the past, and the past participle. It's called irregular because it does not follow that pattern of adding a D or an ED. So be prepared tomorrow to talk about specifically, I think, we'll get into it a little bit about linking verbs and action verbs and what that means, but I think we're going to spend an awful lot of time talking about these verb forms and doing a lot of practice on it. So like I said, tomorrow I will be looking at your notes. You should have all of your helping verbs written down, and you should have, at the very least, the trickier irregular verbs written down. I want to see that you made an effort to read through the list and to see which ones might be a little bit trickier than the other ones. All right, I'll see you tomorrow. We'll talk about specifically, probably spending the most time on verb forms.